distinguished guests, we meet here at a moment of testing for Europe and the United States, and for the international order that we have worked for generations to build. Throughout human history, societies have grappled with fundamental questions of how to organize themselves, the proper relationship between the individual and the state, the best means to resolve inevitable conflicts between states. And it was here in Europe, through centuries of struggle, through war and enlightenment, repression and revolution, that a particular set of ideals began to emerge. The belief that through conscience and free will, each of us has the right to live as we choose. The belief that power is derived from the consent of the governed, and that laws and institutions should be established to protect that understanding. And those ideas eventually inspired a band of colonialists across an ocean, and they wrote them into the founding documents that still guide America today, including the simple truth that all men and women are created equal. But those ideals have also been tested here in Europe and around the world. Those ideals have often been threatened by an older, more traditional view of power. This alternative vision argues that ordinary men and women are too small-minded to govern their own affairs, that order and progress can only come when individuals surrender their rights to an all-powerful sovereign.
It is over. The shortest-serving Prime Minister stepping down.
I came into office at a time of great economic and international instability. Families and businesses were worried about how to pay their bills. Putin's illegal war in Ukraine threatens the security of our whole continent, and our country has been held back for too long by low economic growth. I was elected by the Conservative Party with a mandate to change this.
A mandate which slipped away after just 6 weeks.
I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party. I have therefore spoken to His Majesty the King.
Charles I, the only British king to have his head chopped off. He fell out with his parliament. He pitched his country into civil war. Was he the victim of a bloody coup by power-hungry commoners determined to bring down the monarchy, or was he simply the victim of his own arrogance?
What drove Charles was his belief in the divine right of kings, his conviction that he alone, appointed by God, could rule the land. And it was precisely his fervour for absolute monarchy that led his country to become a republic for the first and the only time.
In 1603, James VI of Scotland moved from Dunfermline Palace, just outside Edinburgh, down to London to become James I of England, successor to the Virgin Queen Elizabeth. But one member of James's family was left behind, his youngest son, Charles. He was just 3 years old, and he'd been so sickly as an infant that no one expected him to survive. His health was still so fragile, his family didn't dare subject the poor little boy to the arduous journey south.
Luckily, that wasn't a problem, not in terms of the succession at least. Charles's elder brother Henry was next in line for the throne. He'd been strong and healthy from birth, and he was being groomed in London to be the model prince, charming, athletic, intelligent. Charles, by contrast, had a rather introverted childhood, moving from one royal palace to another in the company of his tutors and his guardians. But all that was going to change. On the 6th of November, 1612, his brother Henry succumbed to a mystery fever and died.
Charles, the weakling prince, was heir to the throne. And that year he suffered a second blow. His sister Elizabeth married Prince Frederick of Bohemia and sailed away to the continent to live with him. Charles, aged 12, was now alone.
The teenage Charles, who came to London, was a painfully shy and solemn young man. He'd blush when strangers spoke to him, and he suffered from a stutter. He was also rather short of stature, never growing to more than 5'4". But the knowledge that he'd be king put iron in his soul. To get rid of his stammer, he used to talk with his mouth full of pebbles. So much for 17th century speech therapy. And in order to boost up his frail physique, he'd go running around here, St James's Park.
James I, Charles's father, was a frivolous character who was happy to leave the business of running the country to his advisors. He taught his son that a king had a divine right to rule, but that was all they agreed on. The serious Charles was embarrassed by his father's fun-loving ways.
This basement cellar of Banqueting House in Whitehall was one of the favourite haunts of James I, and it was a bit of a dive. Here the old king would carouse in the company of lightly clad ladies and hard-drinking men. Charles grew more and more disgusted.
A young man called George Villiers, the son of a penniless squire, was James's favourite, and rumours abounded of their homosexual love affair. People gossiped that Elizabeth was a king, now James is a queen. James was unabashed. Within 3 years, he'd made Buckingham an earl.
But Buckingham was no fool. He took care to ingratiate himself with the young Charles. And when James died in March 1625, he smoothly moved in as the new king's closest advisor.
Buckingham went to work. He found Charles a wife, the French Catholic princess Henrietta Maria. Charles was enchanted by her, and soon after he became king, they were married. But the relationship rapidly declined. Henrietta found Charles inhibited and cold. He found her sulky and spoilt. After 6 weeks they parted, only to meet and then quarrel again. Charles's moody wife was not his only preoccupation. Like most English kings before him, Charles saw war as the means of exercising his powers. Encouraged by Buckingham, he set his sights on Spain, which had inflicted a series of slights on the English crown. In June 1625, Charles summoned Parliament to raise the money for war, but the Commons, composed of landowners and wealthy merchants, refused him, more from distrust of Buckingham than of the new young king.
For Charles, this was a challenge that he had to break. He believed almost fanatically in the divine right of kings, his God-given entitlement to honour and obedience from his subjects. He was convinced that he knew best, and no commoner, not even those in Parliament, had the right to challenge him. When Parliament refused his request for more money, he took it as a personal affront to his status. So he dissolved it.
1976, the birth of evil was foretold in The Omen. In 1978, a terrifying prophecy was fulfilled in Damien, Omen 2. And now, you will witness the ultimate challenge to the future of mankind as the trinity of living terror is completed in the final conflict.
Yes, Mr. President.
I've just appointed Mr. Damien Thorne as our new ambassador to the court of St. James.
Damien Thorne is 32, attractive, brilliant, charismatic. To the modern world, he brings a purpose, a vision, a destiny. He's one step away from the most important position on Earth.
Disciples of the Watch, I stand before you in the name of the one who is cast out from heaven, but is alive in me.
The power of evil is no longer in the hands of a child. Heed the warning. Prepare for the final conflict, the concluding chapter of the Omen trilogy.
Now begins a new era of peace and prosperity for Springfield.
Maggie, it's true. You are the Gem Child.
4 centuries of patient sacrifice has finally paid off. All is peace and harmony.
I'm sorry, but I know God would never ask a mother to sacrifice her child for the good of the world. Again? Maybe I'm just being selfish. I don't know.
No, Marge, you're the most giving person I know. Besides, I gave them another gem child to sit on their precious throne.
Step aside, ladies. I'm bringing the peace. I am so staying up past my bedtime.